termed the switch on. This is a space for conversations around leadership and decision making in the system that keeps the lights on. I'm Julieta with Electric Power Engineers, and I will be your host. Today, I am joined by Elizabeth Cook. She's Vice President at the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies, AEIC. Elizabeth brings both a utility and industry perspective with previous experience at Duquesne Light and Company, and now working closely with utilities and industry on grid modernization. She also hosts a podcast focused on grid mod herself. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Really glad to be here. Look forward to this.
Great. So to start, it would be great to hear from you your role today and how you see grid mod from where you sit at AEIC.
Yes, so currently today I'm serving two roles. I serve as the Vice President at the Associated Edison Illuminating Companies, which is a membership organization, utility members only. It's been around since 1885. And then I'm also a program director of a sister company we started in May of 2024, the AEIC Center for Operational Excellence, really where we're creating grid modernization type challenges to really drive, these very complex conversations through our membership group.
Great.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess my role is really working with utilities and the leaders around not only grid modernization, but like operational excellence, hence the name, and really the implementation, which is what I've found, and I guess we'll dig into today talking about. But really, it's been an awesome ride so far. It really gives me this wide view across the industry. So.
Great. Yes, we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that, how your perspective has changed, right, from being at the utility to having this broader perspective. So I like to share always that I sort of got hooked on the grid, as an engineer working on power systems when I realized that it was this big system being balanced second by second for us customers to have power available at all times, and that most of us never think about it as users. And that's when it clicked that electricity isn't just optional. It's something really that we and the society depends on every day. And it comes with a tremendous responsibility. And you probably can share some of that, having been at a utility and now working with them. So I wanted to ask you, when did you first realize that the work you do has real consequences and that if we do it wrong, people would feel them?
Yeah. I was actually just sharing this story a little bit at a lunch I was just at, but when I think about where I've come from, where I am, and where I'm headed, which is kind of how I break down almost all things that I do. I had the blessings of my first job being mentored with my the boss at the time, John Pasurba, where he genuinely was so enthusiastic about power system stability and tying it to the reality of like what that means to the bigger purpose. So, my first experience of the power systems was the transmission realm. So we were really looking at, qualifying, quantifying how these large pieces of equipment all interconnect with each other and how to ensure that we wouldn't have rolling blackouts. So very early on, and really what the trigger of getting into the industry was during my senior year, fall semester. There was a bulletin board made by a professor kind of sharing, do you want to learn what happened during the Northeast 2003 blackout? And so when I put like that really early seed that was planted my last year of college and then my first boss, like I never lost the awareness that like the work that I did applied to this much bigger system. And I think, when I look back, I've carried that through and through. And anyone that wants to talk to me or listen to me, I feel like they'll get some kind of antidote of that realization. And I think we need to do a better job, especially with the next series and generation of workers, to really ground our work in the reality that it's an act of service to provide electricity to all, and we get to be a part of that. Yeah, so yeah, I think we have a common theme there.
Definitely,
uh,
definitely. I always joke that
it definitely. I was just saying, it
go ahead.
definitely wasn't during like earlier years. So I was definitely older, right? Like I feel like we should get like my mission now lately is like how do we inform and educate like teens,
Yeah.
adolescents, or even younger of like thinking about this marvelous machine that we've created and now we all have a little bit of ownership of. So
Yeah, no, what I was going to comment on is that even in electrical engineering, right? When I got a bachelor's and master's, it was still like power systems had not been necessarily the sexiest, they like to say, right? A theme. There was many others that people went on, and I couldn't believe it, right? It was like even the fact that as a user, I had known that before, and so you said it really well. It's like how do we even further, or the opposite, even before, how do we get the teams and everybody also involved in this important asset?
and I'll say in another like aha moment I had was, I was in the transmission realm. And even when I was very focused on the bulk electric system and the much larger grid, this idea or understanding of the distribution
Mhm.
grid wasn't something that became a reality to me until I started doing some research as a leader of transmission planning about what is this grid that my counterparts were sitting right next
Yeah.
to me. And so I always think that is fascinating as well as even working within the utilities, like that silo transmission distribution and like the ideology is like on the outside in. I don't think there's a whole lot of folk that understand that those groups are just beginning to
Yeah.
like communicate or understand each other. And yes, they the grid follows, Ohm's law and our power fundamentals, but like how they were designed, operated, and now maintain are completely two different realms, but they also interconnect. So, just thinking about like education and information sharing, when do you need to understand and like why? So I
Yeah.
think, that's been a journey too. Because I'm fascinated by, I went 16 years in the industry until I really started learning about the intricacies of distribution.
Definitely.
Felt like I should share. And that, that's kind of one of the themes of grid mod
Yes, yes. Well, you
is that blurring of the lines.
absolutely, and you're hitting on one of my favorite topics. And I think there was a reason why, right? The systems, there was a reason why we could design them and operate them in silos. And some of my favorite moments, I would say, of last year is when I was working on an integrated planning project with a utility, and it was very tactical. And so we put together transmission folks and distribution folks, and they were figuring out what they needed to know from each other, what was in it to them to integrate. It wasn't just that
Mm-hmm.
integration is good, and those aha moments for them, like, oh, really, we should, let's go do that together, right? And it's going to change the way we do things next year. That's I think where we need to do a little bit more of involving and understanding that there is, it's going to make your life better as a distribution planner or as a transmission planner.
I mean, I'll just say, that's the essence of the AEIC Center for Operational Excellence is really bringing the topics to the forefront that require the de-siloing of the silos and really creating the conversations of their peers that are within the utility, let alone, you know, providing education to the external stakeholders. I think there's an enormous amount of education, labor of love to really break down those barriers and bring that larger perspective to each of the individual business groups. So, I mean, that is kind of at the core of where I sit is like what topics or what issues are utilities actively struggling with? Can I identify peers that are also in that space having the opportunity that I do? And then just bringing them into a room for them to meet each other. Um, I actually just ran, and I'm in the process of running multiple workshops around load forecasting. And I was very intentional about the language I used because I think it is key that the entities that are in charge of the load forecast, aka sits in very different parts of the utilities depending on the ownership, the regulatory state, or really the maturity or the size. So you have your like regulatory rates, you have now your transmission, you have your distribution planners that have access to all this amazing data, and then you have kind of the end users and all of those, and of course your generation, depending on which utility, and all of them are actively being challenged based on all this change. And so, what is that core foundation of data? And I'll just say it's been really rewarding just to observe internal utility intellects becoming aware of each other. And I think in that of itself is a value. And then, what they do with that relationship is up to them. But just bringing this topic to the table so that those parties are aware of what their end products are doing and how they interconnect with each other.
Absolutely.
Walk right into that one.
Absolutely.
It's really important. I think, if you don't have the mover or someone kind of lighting that aware light bulb,
Yeah.
It's really hard to find.
Yeah. Very good. So you've been talking, and we've been talking as an industry about grid mod for a while now. So I wanted to ask you, what is harder about actually doing it that people might think, and where do you think we are in terms of the progress?
Yeah. So, I guess, when I think about my experience as, a consultant providing services to the utilities, and then when I was inside of utilities itself, there's a complexity up close within this one system. Well, there I thought was one system. And then uh, realizing when I was trying to advance or manage or really construct a business case or tell a story or really champion agents. I probably didn't use agents back then, but individuals that wanted to do the work together. It became a very, it wasn't a technical challenge. It truly was a interpersonal leadership, human challenge. And now moving into this broader industry and have the opportunity to talk to all these individuals, you know, we're all, and I say we're all, is like, I think beings are challenged by the different acronyms, their different perspective of where they sit in the org chart or where they sit in the utility space, like the language that we use, the IT versus the operation folk, how do they talk to each other, the rates and regulatory with the operation folks, how do they talk to each other, the external stakeholders and the utilities that there's an enormous amount of humans that wake up on Monday and go to work and finish the week on a Friday because they truly want to ensure the lights stay on. And then there's like levels of trust and of hierarchy and conversation. So it really blew up. And to me, like when I think back of like, if I know what I know now versus how would I have approached launching like an initiative or a charter or even a new team within a utility, I would do it very differently in a positive way. Because it's when we think about grid modernization, like someone just asked me this question, like, what is grid modernization? And I would say, well, this is everything. And then it was almost like, am I just like trying to build an empire? But when you think about it's ultimately developing the processes based on accessibility of technology and data and hardware that has never been available, embedding that into systems that have existed for decades. And so, like, what's harder is like, I think people think grid modernization comes with like a clean sheet of paper, but it's landing on top of all this like legacy processes and these fragmented datas and the workforce constraints. And so, the term grid modernization, I think, is like identifying and creating the methods for full situational awareness of all assets from the bulk generation, transmission, distribution to the edge, understanding that performance, how it's currently today without any forecast or projected new ways, right? What like capacity, like how it's currently operating, to then even begin to dream and envision and drive a future of optimization and predictive analytics and like this very flexible grid. So I think, that, I mean, I guess to sum up my long thing, it's really having accessibility to the data to input it into the legacy processes and evolve change to create this visibility and awareness to prioritize and de-risk the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of the power grid's operation. So it's I think a lot of people spend time in the future state, but the real work is like right in the middle and like cleaning up the models, clarifying ownership, updating your standards, aligning engineering with IT and OT and field planning, asset management, right? And getting people to trust the data and then getting those handoffs right. So like the integration points and then really how to implement that all. And that's in essence, I guess, is grid modernization. And it's a lot harder than I think a lot of us from the outside looking in, you know, want to believe or even can comprehend because they don't get how all the parts play with each other.
Definitely. Again, integrated planning, right? At the
Yeah.
heart of it. That's really interesting how you've defined a grid mod, and it actually brings me to something that I've been talking quite a bit about on the data. Right, we can't even, I will say strongly maybe, but we can't maybe even today agree at one point. Right, we take a snapshot of the grid, and all the different departments would have a different answer, right, of what's happening right now. Let alone agree on what's going to happen in 10 years, 5, 10 years, 20 years, all aggregated up and down, and it all adds up. That is still a dream that we're working towards, right? But it is that challenge of the different departments, the different data sources. And it was even shared at ESIG event. I was, I think it was last fall, and the blackout in Spain and Portugal had happened, and the biggest challenge towards doing the report of what had happened was the data, right? Collecting all of the data from all of the different entities, all of the different departments to even start understanding what happened in a given second or minute.
Okay. Well, going off of your Spain blackout, when you think about the event and really all that happened there, it was kind of this quiet event that caused a large impact. Even back in the 2003 Northeast blackout, when you think about how that evolved and what we learned from it, it was information was seen, but the silos were existent for all reasons. And so the ability for those that were seeing something that was not of usualness didn't have the means or the visibility to then connect with the people that need to see it. Now, granted, it was in like an 8-minute span, but like even going back that far, it came down to signals, having the data at the right time with the correct latency, and the systems that were being trusted to show up the way they needed to. And so even like the Texas incident, the winter storms, there's something that, it happened like a decade prior, a much smaller scale, but like studies were done, the information was correlated, the documents galore were written of like the proposed changes. And again, that was like a massive amount of information. And how do you share it and then gain the accessibility of it and then take action on it is, another like big lesson about, I think, what grid mod surrounds is like, okay, say we have all this data and say it's all perfectly architected and plumbed. And now you have this amazing business intelligence. Like, are we in a position operationally to take action? So, like, it's not all about the technology, like, the companies that come into utilities and be like, just give us all your data and we'll make everything better for you. And it's like, there's human interactions that will never be replaced in the near future. So like, it's such a line to be walked right now, especially with everything that everyone else is talking about, knowing about the really pragmatic
Yeah.
approaches that are taken to keep the lights on.
Yeah. 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 So I was going to ask you, since well, I brought up and then you brought up also um, blackouts, extreme weather events. Where do you think the system is more fragile that people might like to admit? Maybe especially as we add complexity in the way we also operate it, but where do you think that that weak link that worries you might be?
I'm laughing. Um, there's something about human behavior that, like, when you become I don't know, overwhelmed with the amount of threads that one shall be worried about, is probably, it was a realization that I stepped into inside the utility when I began to ask questions, and just seeing how complex and how many individual work streams are required to ensure the overall operation of the existing grid. So, I mean, not that I lose sleep at night, because I'm a really good sleeper, because I do a lot of intentional exercises to get there. But I think that's what drives me to show up every day and focus on this industry, is because at the end of the day, it is going to require exceptional individuals to see the bigger picture and to thread the larger needs. So, like, if I can educate, inform, and spark that light within that individual to make that ripple change, like, I'm doing a service. And so I guess I know I'm skirting around your question, but you know, I could rattle them off, and they're all very relative to, like, studying those blackouts. And even I had a fun conversation. Well, there was levity to it. When you're a transmission manager, you're signing your life away to all of these regulatory requirements and NERC standards. You're like middle management, and you have to say, yes, I believe that everything in this document and every system that has touched this piece of data is correct. And you're like, yes. And then you identify, like, how many humans have to touch that data to ensure that data is accurate. And then the weight on your shoulders is like, I just want to ensure that I am not the cause for a cascading blackout that will take out the Western Interconnect. And that's like the risk that sits on an enormous amount of transmission planning realm folk. And then you shift gears, and let's say you pivot into the distribution world, which is like, what I did, similar to this other person I was talking to. And it's like you go from very large problem with a few, fires that you gotta, not literal fires, to the distribution world. It's like, how do I ensure that this Taco Bell is connected in the time that we promised the customer? So you have tens of thousands of those problems, but you're, putting them out. So at the core of all of it, though, is what would make every individual utility employee's life better is having the IT architecture set up for success, and having a visionary leader that provides the oversight, overhead, and accountability to really just like a core couple of people to set up the systems, to create the data piping, to then champion data ownership, data process ownership, that creates this like enormous, almost, snowball effect to unlocking capabilities that reduce the fears that we all sit, because we don't feel we have the information to make these really difficult decisions. So I think the more we can educate and inform the operational driven firefighters that understand the the weight that we carries, and if you have access to team members that can bring that type of information to the forefront, so you can expedite your decisions and feel it's grounded in reality, the better off we'll be. So there's too many things that I think will break, but like, why is because of the fragmented data and the systems And it's all being exploited at this moment in time because of this enormous electrification capability and these large loads that are being requested. So we went from a lagging industry just 4 or 5 years ago to this exponential load growth that we only saw relatively this much since the roaring 20s and into the 70s. So, and I think we're like 10 times that type of growth year. So that was long winded.
Definitely. No, but it's really interesting, and I think it was a really good segue of what we were discussing, right? And it's not only, well, how foundational the data architecture is. That point, you made it loud and clear, but also that the technology might be there, but our ability to manage it is really key, and that is people and processes, right? And so yes, we have cloud-based systems, yes, we can do 8760, we can have now the computational to do so many things, even on the software hardware, read mod technologies, but everything goes through the, the ability of the humans to manage that, right? And that has to be simplified. We have to find ways of doing that. So no, I really like that. I was going to ask you, and you also mentioned what has changed now with electrification and large loads. So how long have you had your podcast for?
I think I released my first. It was originally All Things DER
Yeah, I
in
remember.
the spring of 2022, and so I've been at it ever since. We converted to the Grid Mod Pod to really just to expand topics
Yeah.
of conversation. The fall of 2023.
So I was curious, what have you learned from all of those wonderful conversations? And have you noticed any shift over time, on how people talk about the issues that you're asking about, DRs and grid modernization?
Uh, how do I say this without saying it's? I think the purpose and the reason why I originally launched it. I was working for a utility. I was within. I had this amazing opportunity, really, to be tapped on the shoulder to attend an AEIC DER subcommittee event, which I had no idea what that meant. But when I arrived in San Francisco, California, it was 40 of my peers talking about all things grid. And very quickly, I saw that it wasn't just a challenge I was trying to figure out. This was an industry-wide challenge. And so I was a part of that committee in 2017, and then I became chair in 2021. And, one of the products or deliverables that our subcommittee do was really internal documents. It wasn't for external publication, but it was to create, artifacts or deliverables that really champion the learnings of our gatherings. And so it was at a meeting where I noticed we were trying to gather more engagement. And as you know, not everyone loves to read. So I thought, well, why don't I just ask my peers and friends? So there's lucky 8 that first said yes to me. And I just interviewed them to share, a thread of the larger picture. And I guess that rolled into, I would never have known where it was going to take me. So I think that's the fun of this ride. But what I have learned is that the challenges and the conversations we were having in 2017 are ever more relevant, if not more accurate and real, and not like I told you so, but just confirmation that like this is not something that we should not be discussing as a peer-to-peer networked organization. It is becoming ever more apparent that the systems that we relied on are no longer the systems that we need. And we truthfully, what do conversations and connections create is trust. And so the reason why I started the podcast and to make it external was the amount of industry that was not internal utility folk blaming everything on those utilities and realizing the utilities were filled with people who were doing their best under the systems that have been constructed over 100 years. So I wanted to give a voice to really these innovative, powerful, thoughtful individuals that are putting their best foot forward in hopes that those that hold the strings that prevent the trust that's needed, or maybe, they'll have a different perspective or an aha moment that makes them realize that, oh, the utilities need this data because this data will ultimately enable them to be safer, more reliable, more affordable, more effective. And let's stop questioning their behaviors and start trusting that those that are trying to do their best and showing true value by employing said technology is at the customer's interest. Now, granted, I'm naive, but that is genuinely like where a lot of my energies come from. And I guess what you said, what I learned is that every conversation reminds me that that truly is what is missing is we've created a system where the parties that can make this all better do not trust each other by the social constructs that have been put in place. So it's time to really have that, bring us all to the table and let's talk, truth. So that's what I've learned, and I keep learning it. And I'm hoping that when, the right people get invited to the right tables and the right plan gets to be unlocked so we can do the work and get to where we need to be.
Great, powerful. I was just gonna say, I think on the question of also what have you seen that has maybe changed? I think one thing that I'm sensing from you is that if DRs, grid modernization, data foundations, everything that you were discussing, if that was applicable 4 years ago, it's even more in the forefront now,
right,
with data centers, load growth that we didn't even expect. Everything that we were working on is even more important to
relevant,
address
and important,
relevant.
Right. Absolutely. And that's, I guess my point is, I don't think anything has changed. I think that it's been affirmation after confirmation after awareness that we need to go in this direction, which is everything I said before.
Excellent. So to close off, what keeps you optimistic about our system that keeps the lights on, and what gives you confidence that we can actually implement these harder changes that we're talking about?
I think it's the conversations that I get to have and the time and the space that these leaders allow me to have, and seeing people show up with the right intent is the hope. And I also am seeing that some of these ideas or capabilities or functionalities are being unlocked. And so there's somewhat of a crawl, walk, run language that we use in the industry. And there's a lot more people going from crawl to walk and a little bit of folks going from walk to run. So, it's an exponential. So I see that happening. And so I think, the right moves are being made. And it's really, just breaking down those last few barriers, which would be a whole other podcast, to really scale everything that could happen with the operationally flexible, situationally aware type utilities. So, that's what gives me hope, is I see and I hear leaders are sharing those successes.
The conversations. That's great.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Liz, for your time and the chat. Thank you for listening to our listeners. The Switch is produced by Electric Power Engineers, and we're turning the switch off. Until next time.
Thank you for listening.